On the 22nd of January 1879, the African sun beat down mercilessly on the British camp at the foot of a sphinx-shaped hill. The redcoats of the 24th Regiment of Foot, veterans of countless colonial wars and the polished epitome of imperial power, calmly cleaned their Martini Henry rifles. They were cutting-edge technology, the spearhead of a civilization that considered itself the pinnacle of human progress. Their mission was simple: to crush a kingdom of savage natives who dared to defy the will of Queen Victoria. Victory was not a question, it was an axiom, a simple matter of time before industrial firepower put the barbarians in their place. The complacency was as thick as the midday heat. What these soldiers did not know was that, a few miles away, hidden in the stillness of a valley, an army of 20,000 warriors waited in absolute, disciplined silence. They were not a savage horde, but a professional army, the product of a military system as rigorous as Sparta's. They carried no rifles, but they wielded a fanatical loyalty to their king and a short spear designed for a brutal, personal purpose. They had not come to make noise or perform tribal displays. They had come to defend their land from the pale-skinned invaders. They were about to teach the largest and most arrogant empire the world had ever known the true meaning of primordial fear. The annihilation of the British column at Isandlwana was not a miracle, nor a stroke of luck for a primitive force. It was the direct and inevitable result of an imperial arrogance so profound it had rotted strategic sense. This is not a tale of valiant underdogs triumphing against all odds. It is the deconstruction of a myth, the myth of European invincibility and inherent technological superiority. The British were not defeated by Zulu spears. They were defeated by their own contempt, by their refusal to fortify their camp, by their decision to divide their forces in the face of an unknown enemy, and by their inability to conceive that a nation without gunpowder could possess a tactical genius superior to their own. The giant of our story is the British Empire, personified in General Lord Chelmsford. He is the archetypal product of his system, confident, condescending, and utterly convinced of the superiority of his army and culture. His goal is to force a decisive battle to quickly crush the Zulu resistance and secure a glorious, cheap victory. He leaves Lieutenant Colonel Henry Poulain, a competent administrator and desk man with no real combat experience, in command of the Isandlwana camp. The British mindset is that of a hunter entering a wild territory, never for an instant conceiving that he could become the prey. His confidence is not a virtue, it is a disease, a self-imposed blindness. The British force at the camp, some 1,800 men, including regular soldiers and colonial troops, is a microcosm of imperial power. Its 600 companies of the 24th Regiment are hardened professionals. Their primary tool is the Martini Henry rifle, a single-shot, breech-loading weapon capable of firing 10 to 12 rounds per minute with lethal accuracy at hundreds of yards. Supported by field artillery, their firepower is theoretically capable of annihilating any force that dares to charge across open ground. Their true strength, however, is the source of their downfall, a blind, unshakable faith that their technology makes them invincible. This belief leads to the fatal decision not to form a defensive laager with their wagons, considering it unnecessary and a sign of weakness. Facing this technological giant is a force the British are incapable of understanding. In command on the field is Nshingwayo Kamahole Koza, a veteran, cunning, and respected Zulu general who embodies the cold determination of a people fighting for their existence. His army of approximately 20,000 warriors, or impis, is one of the most formidable military CS machines in African history. Their main weaponry is simple but brutally effective: the short stabbing spear, the ikalwa, and large ox-hide shields. Their true weapon, however, is not steel, but their iron discipline, their incredible speed, capable of covering 80 kilometers in a day, and their sophisticated tactical system. The Zulus' motivation is pure and existential. They are not fighting for conquest or imperial glory. They are fighting to defend the Zulu kingdom, their land, their cattle, their families, and their way of life, from an unprovoked invasion. For every warrior, the battle is a sacred duty to their king, Ketshwayo Kampande, and their nation. Unlike the British, they do not underestimate their enemy. They know the power of the spitting firearms, but they trust in their numbers, speed, and courage to break through the barrier of bullets and bring the fight to close quarters, where their dreaded Ikolwa can do its work. They are not savages. They are patriots, defending their homeland. The battlefield is a trap disguised as an advantage. The British camp sits at the base of Mount Isandlwana, a rock formation resembling a sphinx. Before them stretches a vast, rolling plain, dotted with ravines and gullies. To the British eye, this terrain seems ideal. It offers wide fields of fire, a perfect open space for their Martini Henry rifles to unleash carnage on any force attempting a frontal assault. They do not realize that the very vastness and irregularities of the terrain, which they see as insignificant, are the perfect cloak of invisibility. They will allow the immense Zulu army to conceal itself, deploy, and execute its complex envelopment maneuver without being detected until it is too late. The fatal error, the decision that seals the camp's fate, is not made by a frightened soldier, but by the commander-in-chief himself. Based on flawed reconnaissance reports and his own conviction that the Zulus would avoid a direct battle, Lord Chelmsford reaches a disastrous conclusion. He believes the main Zulu army is far to the east. Obsessed with forcing that decisive battle, he commits the cardinal sin of military strategy. He divides his force. He takes more than half of his men, the most experienced half, and sets off in a futile pursuit of a decoy, leaving behind a weakened camp under the command of an inexperienced officer with vague and contradictory orders. To witness how this miscalculation becomes the prologue to a massacre, to see how arrogance blinds an empire, subscribe to our channel and activate notifications, because the lesson in humility that Great Britain is about to receive will be written in the blood of its sons. The morning passes in a tense calm. Suddenly, a small patrol of colonial cavalry, led by Colonel Anthony Durnford, who had arrived as reinforcements, stumbles upon the unthinkable. Investigating a nearby valley, they accidentally discover not a small war party, but the vanguard of the main Zulu army, 20,000 men resting in absolute silence. The element of surprise is lost. The alarm is raised. Forced to attack ahead of schedule, and without the blessing of the full moon, the Zulu army rises as one man. There are no war cries or tribal chants. Only the sound of 20,000 pairs of bare feet pounding the earth and the ominous rustle of shields clashing, a growing black wave stretching for 5 kilometers. In the camp, initial disbelief gives way to frantic action. Colonel Pauline, the inexperienced administrator, makes a decision that would be taught for generations as an example of what not to do. Instead of forming a compact defensive perimeter around the wagons, he orders his men to advance and form a firing line nearly a kilometer from the camp. His intention is to keep the Zulus at a distance and take advantage of his rifle's range. Initially, the tactic seems to work. The line of redcoats unleashes a devastating volley fire upon the advancing central chest of the Zulu formation. But the red line, though lethal, is too long and thin, a fatal flaw against the classic Zulu tactic of the horns of the buffalo. This formation consists of a central chest that fixes the enemy, while 2 horns or flanks extend to encircle and annihilate them. Pauline's line, stretched over 1.5 kilometers, is terrifyingly vulnerable to being outflanked. Worse, it dangerously strains the ammunition supply lines. The men are too far from the camp, and bringing the heavy boxes of bullets to them across open ground under enemy fire becomes an almost impossible task. The British fire is terrible, apocalyptic. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of Zulu warriors fall under the rain of lead, but the Zulu discipline is superhuman. The warriors in the rear rank step over their fallen comrades, absorbing the losses with a courage bordering on madness, and continue to advance, relentlessly closing the distance. Soon, the rate of fire from the Martini Henrys begins to falter. The soldiers on the firing line scream for more ammunition. The bullets are running out. The crisis has begun, not from a lack of courage, but from a lack of logistics. In the camp, a scene of bureaucratic desperation unfolds. The quartermasters struggle frantically to open the reserve ammunition boxes, but by regulation, the wooden crates are sealed with brass screws to protect the powder from moisture, requiring specific tools to open them. In the panic of battle, finding the right men with the right tools becomes a nightmare. The rate of fire on the front line, which was the only British advantage, drops dramatically. There are pauses, silences. The Zulus, experts in the acoustics of battle, hear the slackening of the shots and know what it means. It is their signal. They quicken their charge. It is then that the trap closes. The right horn of the Zulu formation, a force of several thousand warriors that had used the dead ground and ravines to advance unseen, finally appears where no one expected it, on the left flank and rear of the British line. The surprise is total. The soldiers of the 24th Regiment, focused on the frontal threat, are suddenly attacked from the side and from behind. The cohesion of the Red Line, already weakened by the lack of ammunition, breaks completely. Order disintegrates, and the battle instantly transforms into what the British feared most: hand-to-hand combat. The Martini Henry rifles, magnificent at a distance, become useless. They are too long to handle in a melee, and after a single shot, there is no time to reload. The soldiers try to fight with their bayonets, but they are outnumbered, 10 to 1, 20 to 1. Now it is the turn of the Zulu Ikalwa. The short spear, designed for stabbing in close quarters, does its brutal and efficient work. The collapse is a chain reaction. The broken line falls back in disarray towards the camp, closely pursued by thousands of Zulus. But there is no refuge. The camp is not fortified. The few men left there, along with the civilians, are overrun by the human tide. Small groups of soldiers form back to back, fighting to the last man, selling their lives dearly, but the outcome is inevitable. British discipline, so famous on the parade ground, dissolves into an individual panic for survival. Colonel Pauline dies trying to defend the regimental tent. Colonel Durnford and his horsemen, also surrounded, fight until the last of them falls. The dries. Annihilation is almost total. The Zulu warriors, following their king's order to wash their spears, give no quarter. The camp becomes a slaughterhouse, a chaos of screams, smoke, and the metallic sound of the Ikalwa. The Queen's color, which had flown so proudly that morning, is torn down and trampled into the blood-stained dust. At the climax of the battle around 2:29 in the afternoon, a celestial phenomenon adds a touch of cosmic horror to the carnage. A partial solar eclipse darkens the battlefield. For the Zulus, who called the event the Day of the Dead Moon, the dimming of the sun at the moment of their triumph was a powerful omen, a sign of their ancestors' favor. For the few British still alive, it must have seemed as if the heavens themselves had turned black in mourning for their empire's humiliation. When the sun shines again, it illuminates a scene of total devastation. The British camp has been wiped from the face of the earth. The bodies of over 1,300 Imperial soldiers lie scattered among the shattered wagons and looted tents. The technology, discipline, and confidence of the world's most powerful nation had proven useless against the strategy, speed, and courage of a people they refused to respect. Isandlwana is not a simple defeat. It is the deconstruction of an empire. British arrogance had placed its men in a perfect firing line, but it had also placed them in a perfect trap. They had so despised their enemy that it never occurred to them that the savages might have a plan. And on that African plain, the Zulu plan, executed with terrifying discipline and precision, had proven infinitely superior. The British Lion had not been defeated. It had been flayed. The statistics of the carnage are a stark epitaph to imperial arrogance. Of the approximately 1,800 British and colonial soldiers present at the camp, more than 1,300 lay dead. Entire regiments were almost completely wiped out. Only about 60 Europeans managed to escape the slaughter to tell the incredible tale. On the other hand, the Zulu victory came at a high cost. Although exact figures are impossible to determine, it is estimated that between 1,000 and 2,000 warriors died under the devastating fire of the Martini Henrys. Yet, despite their terrible losses, they had achieved what no other indigenous force had done: annihilate a modern British army in a pitched battle. The fate of the commanders on the field was sealed along with that of their men. Lieutenant Colonel Pauline and Colonel Durnford died fighting bravely amidst the carnage, paying the ultimate price for a chain of errors that were not all their own. The true architect of the defeat, Lord Chelmsford, returned at dusk, drawn by reports that something was terribly wrong. What he found was a nightmarish scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life, a sepulchral silence covering a field of death and destruction. His camp annihilated, his men slaughtered and dismembered, and his queen's flag gone. His reputation was ruined forever, becoming a symbol of the incompetence and underestimation that led to the disaster. The immediate reaction on the Zulu side was one of euphoria and astonishment. They had achieved a victory beyond their wildest dreams. However, the triumph was tempered by the grim realities of war. The Zulu army, though victorious, was exhausted and had suffered considerable casualties. They lacked the logistical capability to exploit their victory by marching deeper into the colonial territory of Natal. Instead, after looting the camp, they withdrew. The victory at Isandlwana, though glorious, was strategically a dead end. They had won a battle, but they had awakened the fury of a wounded empire that would now, inevitably, seek crushing revenge. The news of the defeat at Isandlwana struck Britain like an earthquake. The first reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by a wave of panic, outrage, and national humiliation. The idea that spear-wielding natives could annihilate a regiment of redcoats was unthinkable and shook the foundations of Victorian confidence in its own invincibility and racial superiority. Prime Minister Disraeli's government, which had initiated the war expecting a quick, cheap conflict, was plunged into a political crisis. To quell public fury and restore the empire's prestige, they were forced to send massive reinforcements, transforming a limited, unauthorized colonial war into a full-scale conflict. The long-term consequence was the destruction of the Zulu kingdom. Although Isandlwana was a spectacular Zulu victory, it was also the catalyst for their own destruction. The humiliation suffered by the British Empire could not go unanswered. The war intensified, and though the Zulus continued to fight with incredible bravery, they could not compete in the long run with the limitless resources of an industrial empire. 6 months later, at the Battle of Ulundi, a much larger and more cautious British army finally crushed the Zulu army using proper defensive tactics. The kingdom was dismembered, and King Cetshwayo was captured. Isandlwana was the zenith of Zulu military power, but also the beginning of its end. Despite their eventual defeat, Isandlwana became a foundational myth and a powerful symbol. For the Zulus and for many colonized peoples around the world, the battle is a memorial to their greatest military victory, a moment when the discipline, strategy, and courage of African warriors humbled the mightiest army on earth. It is an eternal proof that resistance against imperial power is possible. The battle was seared into the Zulu collective memory, a source of immense pride that proved they were not passive victims of conquest, but a formidable warrior nation that made the empire pay a terrible price for its arrogance. For the British Empire and for military history, Isandlwana became a brutal and enduring lesson on the dangers of imperial hubris. It became the textbook example of how underestimating the enemy and over-relying on technology can lead to catastrophe. The battle forced a painful reassessment of colonial tactics and proved that technology alone does not guarantee victory. The defeat was so shocking that it overshadowed all other battles of the war, becoming a dark symbol of the empire's vulnerability, an indelible stain on the reputation of the once invincible redcoat, and a reminder that even the greatest empires can be humbled. The narrative of Isandlwana is filled with images of horror and heroism, but one unforgettable detail transcends the battle itself, adding a layer of cosmic fatality to the event. At the height of the carnage, just as the horns of the buffalo were closing in and annihilation was imminent, the midday sun began to darken. A partial solar eclipse cast the battlefield in an eerie twilight. For the Zulu warriors who knew the heavens well, this event, which they called the Day of the Dead Moon, was interpreted as a divine omen, a sign that the forces of the universe were on their side, spurring them on to final victory. For the few British who survived the slaughter, the sight of the sun dying in the sky at the exact moment of their annihilation must have seemed a cruel and terrifying metaphor. It was as if the heavens themselves had darkened in mourning for the fall of their regiment and the humiliation of their empire. This eclipse was not a cause of the defeat, but it became its most powerful symbol. A moment when the arrogance of an empire that sought to rule the world was itself eclipsed by the fury of a people defending their small corner of the earth, all under the indifferent gaze of a dying sun.